All right, hey there, and welcome to MSL 102 Lesson 03 on team and squad tactics, covering the basic formations and movements. Now, this is the second part of the lessons just about movements and formations. So if you haven't seen the first part where we covered individual movement techniques and squad movement techniques, you might want to go back and watch that first, just so that this one makes a little bit more sense as we're moving into fire team and squad formations. My name is Captain Silver Beatty. I'm an APMS with the University of Montana Grizzly Battalion, and I'm going to be leading you through this lesson today. Now, if you've seen my videos before, you know that QR code right down there, if you scan that, it's going to take you to a live website version of this exact same lesson. And within that, there are going to be some embedded links and some videos, and you can really just go through at that URL and watch it at your own pace. Maybe take some additional notes, whatever you need to do for additional references. So let's jump right into this one. So with this, there are a little bit of extra resources. That read ahead right there is actually some Army doctrine that dives just a bit deeper into this idea of formations and the movements that we talked about in part 1. And that second link is going to take you right back to this exact same YouTube video, so you can have it on hand to reference later if needed. Now, as a quick refresher from part 1, let's talk cover and concealment. Now, if you've already watched that one, you know that cover is something that we use to keep us away from bullets, direct and indirect fires, whereas concealment, that keeps us from being able to be seen. So obviously what we're looking for in engagement situations is cover, right? We want to be protected from bullets, fragments, shrapnel, things like that. Whereas concealment, that's something that we want to use just to keep the enemy from being able to actually see us. Now, we can use concealment in certain situations where we're trying to get eyes on the enemy first, and cover can be utilized in both, right? So good cover, like a big rock formation or something of that nature, can actually keep us from being seen and hurt by indirect and direct fires. So just keep those in mind, that we're always looking for cover and concealment, regardless of the engagement situation or the enemy situation, but especially when there's actually enemy contact. You're always looking for that cover. Now, we talked individual movement techniques in the last one. Just a quick refresher, we talked high crawl, low crawl, and the rush, the 3 to 5 second rush. Remember that high crawl? It's not super fast, but it's not super slow, and you have a little bit higher of a profile. The low crawl, that's our slowest movement, and that's going to be the lowest profile we can get because we're as flat to the ground as possible. And then we've got the rush. Now, that's our quickest movement, but also the one that exposes us the most for that 3 to 5 seconds that we're moving from position to position. And then lastly, in the last video, we talked briefly about the squad movement techniques. Now, that was your traveling overwatch, and your bounding overwatch. And remember that these movement techniques are more about the space and the speed that you're moving an entire formation. So traveling, that's our default. We're about 20 meters between our fire teams. Traveling overwatch, we're going to disperse our people just a little bit more, and we're going to move a little bit slower than traveling, and we're on a higher alert because enemy contact is possible. And that bounding overwatch, that is where we're moving pretty quick, but we're moving one piece of our element at a time. And there's 2 different methods there. We have successive bounds, where we're moving up to each other as we move forward. And then we have the alternate bounding, where one moves up in front of the other, and we keep continuing that way. Now, for the second part of this whole lesson on movement and formations, there are a few other things that we're going to dive into, and that's really talking about our team and squad formations. So by the end of this, I want you to be able to understand how and when to apply the different team movement formations and the characteristics that fall under that. And I also want you to have kind of a base understanding of the various squad movement formations that we implement while we're moving under direct fire. So that's what this whole video is going to talk about. So what do you think? Why do we as teams, squads, platoons, why do we move in this idea of a formation? Well, these formations that we're talking about, they're arrangements of our elements and our individuals, and they're all in relation to one another. So with that, we use our formations for control, flexibility, and security. Those are our three main reasons for why we utilize formations. Now, team leaders actually travel up in front, so they lead by example. This idea of follow me and do as I do, right? So the team leader is in the front. Now, all members of the fire team have to be able to see their team leader, and they'll choose a formation based on a variety of things, namely our mission, the enemy, the terrain and weather that we're dealing with, the troops that we have and other support that we have available, the time that we have available to actually complete this, any civil considerations, and some informational considerations out on the battlefield. Now, maybe you haven't heard all of that broken down as mission, enemy, terrain, etc., but you've probably heard this term of MET-TC, which is now known as MET-TCI. Now, the way I always hear this term is you ask a specific question, how would you do this, or why would you do this, or what would you choose to do this for movement? And people are going to say, well, MET-TC. That really just means it depends on the situation. Now, the answer MET-TC doesn't exactly tell us exactly what formation to use or what movement technique we should use, but we can use aspects of each part of that MET-TCI to figure out what makes the most sense and what's going to be the most effective. And that's what we're going to do with these team and squad formations. So we're going to open up with the very first one, and this one is called your fire team wedge. Now, when you're looking at this slide, you'll notice that it can be done either direction. So this is a fire team wedge right here on the left, and this is a fire team wedge here on the right. I want you to understand that this is one way to do it, this is the other way to do it. Now, at the fire team wedge, this is our most basic formation. Notice we're talking fire team, so just 4 personnel in this formation. We want to keep about a 10-meter interval between our soldiers. And then something that's cool about the wedge is that we can actually expand it and contract it depending on the terrain. So 10 meters is kind of the go-to rule of thumb for how far apart we want to stay, but we can change it and actually adjust our people a little bit within 5 to 10 meters of that to really work with that terrain. So when you're looking at this particular formation, notice we call it a wedge because, well, it's shaped just like a wedge. It's going to wedge out, right? In the front, like we said, we've got that team leader. To the right or left, out on this side, we've got our automatic rifleman, and adjacent to them, we have our grenadier. Now, further down, on the side of the grenadier, you're going to have your rifleman. Now, remember from our composition lessons that the team leader just carries the M4, and they're leading from the front. Your automatic rifleman has the automatic rifle, the 5.56 M249. Your grenadier has your grenade launcher, and your rifleman is also only carrying the M4. So this is our most basic formation at the team size right here. So when we're talking about the fire team wedge, why is the formation expanded or contracted depending on the terrain? What's the point of that? And maybe what are some examples of terrain that we might be in that would cause us to expand or contract? Well, when terrain opens up, formation, we actually expand out, so we have better security, and we can mitigate the potential for an entire element to be engaged by the enemy. We don't want them destroyed on initial contact, so we want to be spread out more when we're in an open area where that's possible. Now, as things get a little bit more dense, think mountains, think some, like there's a lot of trees in the way, then we might actually pull in a little bit more for better security and control, because that type of vegetation makes it hard to see everybody. Now, the rule with going into these formations is that you have to be able to see somebody else within the formation. Everybody has to be able to see their team leader and at least somebody else in there so that we're catching hand and arm signals, so that we're staying on the same direction and going in the same path, right? Now, visibility is absolutely critical when it comes to control. If I'm in charge and I can't see you and we're out where we're supposed to be keeping noise discipline and light discipline, I can't control your movement. So visibility is really crucial, and that's why expanding and contracting becomes important. So why again is that fire team leader at the front of the formation? Like we said, they lead by example. They have to be able to lead and control that element. And that helps ensure that the subordinates have visibility of them, for any nonverbal or verbal communication as well. Okay, so now let's talk the fireteam file. Now, just like the wedge is shaped like a wedge, the fireteam file is shaped just like a file. So with this one, the direction of travel is to the right. So you'll see that team leader right there in front. And about, give or take, 10 meters behind them would be their automatic rifleman. 10 or so meters behind that would be the grenadier, and 10 or so meters behind that would be your rifleman. Now there's some really important things to remember about this file. First of all, we only use it when the terrain or visibility makes it impossible to use the wedge. Like, it's so thick that there's just no way to see each other without being directly behind each other and following the leader, right? Now we're still going to maintain that 10-meter difference. The problem that a lot of people find when they go from a wedge into a file is that they end up kind of getting too close to each other. So they stack up on top of each other. You have to remember to keep that 10-ish meter difference between soldiers. Otherwise, you end up just real close, and then you're just an easier target. So you'll want to spread out, make sure you're keeping that spread. And the last thing is, as soon as the terrain allows you to, you should be moving back out into a wedge. You want that dispersion. You want kind of that bigger area of security. Now, we're going to talk about why security is such a factor when it comes to this. But really, we move into a file because it's got the best control. So the only time we want to use this, visibility sucks, or just the vegetation itself has made it impossible. So this is one of those things that maybe grab 3 of your friends and go out and actually practice this. I know, ma'am, that seems really dumb. Why would I want to go out and practice getting into a line and coming back out into a triangle? Well, because when you're out on a lane, you're going to brain dump this if you don't already have it as muscle memory. So your team leader should always be in the front, but if you're going from a file into a wedge, start learning those hand and arm signals. If your automatic rifleman goes to the right, your grenadier has to go to the left, and your rifleman should be following that grenadier. You always want a balance of your grenadier and your automatic rifleman on each side of the team leader, and your rifleman should always be close to the grenadier. Now, coming from a wedge into a file is pretty simple, but going back out to the wedge might get a little bit more complicated until you practice it a few times. The other thing you'll want to note while you're practicing this is, do you come in and get too close together? Or do you keep that distance between soldiers? Are you able to spread yourselves out and then maintain that distance as you move from formation to formation? So which conditions actually demand that we use the file? Remember, really bad visibility or really dense vegetation. And you should always go back into that wedge as soon as the terrain allows you to. So why is that automatic rifleman next to the team leader in both the wedge and file? Well, it's about control. By keeping that automatic rifleman close to the team leader, who is an experienced team member and has been through all of these different weapons, they're better able to direct fires. Because remember, that automatic rifle is your most casualty producing weapon. So you want that close and within good control so that you can actually direct which way it's going to go. Why do you think it's common to keep the rifleman adjacent to that grenadier? Well, because if the grenadier is stuck using their grenades, then they don't have a more accurate form of fire. So that rifleman can then take that on for them, if that makes sense. If they're working shooting grenades into dead space, there's somebody real close to them that can use ball ammo, so your rifle. So doing this allows your grenadier to focus on their priority target engagements that might be inaccessible to that direct fire. And also, it supports this idea of a balance of firepower. You remember talking about that when we talked about the composition of the team and squad? Well, the automatic riflemen, they have a big sector and they can produce a lot of ammunition at once. So you want on the other side the most that you can get out of the rest of your people in order to kind of keep that balance going. So your rifleman and your grenadier have multiple weapons, and your team leader could turn that way if you absolutely needed to. And that'll kind of balance out what the automatic riflemen can do on their side by themselves. So now let's compare the two against each other. So first, we've got our fire team wedge. That is our default team formation. That's the basic one that we try to stick with the most. And then we've got the fire team file, that we use when we absolutely have to, when the situation just makes it impossible to see each other. Now that could be really bad weather, that could be darkness, that could be dense vegetation, that could be smoke in the area, anything that makes it so you can't see your team leader as well. That's when a file is probably going to be more necessary. So now in comparing these, we want to use our movement characteristics, and those are control, flexibility, fire capabilities and restrictions, and security. So you'll see with that fire team wedge, we've got easy control, good flexibility because we can expand and contract that formation depending on the terrain. The fire capabilities, we have it in all directions, right? It's a 360 security. You've got a balance of firepower with the automatic rifle on the right, you've got your grenadier and rifleman on the left, or switch those. And your security, it's all around. So you've got somebody that can kind of keep their head on a swivel, pulling to the rear. You've got two people that can keep the flanks covered, and you've got your team leader who can also be assisted by people that are behind them towards the front. So you've got a whole 360 of security with just those 4 people. Now when we move into the file, super easy to control. Follow the leader, just keep watching the person in front of you. The flexibility, definitely not as flexible as the wedge. You could expand and contract lengthwise and distance, but you can't go to the left or right because you're just staying in one file. With the fire capabilities, you've got great fires to the flanks or to the sides, but you only have one person in the front and one person in the back. Neither person, the automatic rifleman or the grenadier, can shoot forward or backward because they've got somebody right in front of them. And we definitely don't want any fratricide issues. And with the security, this is the least, for the same reason as the fire capabilities. You only have one person pulling a whole section in front of them, and you only have one person in the rear that can pull security for the whole rear side. So another part of the security thing, like I said, is you also have a lot of people easily in one spot. If you're doing a file, it's too easy to find the first person and just follow down the line with some sort of direct fire from the enemy, right? So your security kind of sucks in the file, which is why we don't want to stay in that formation unless it's absolutely necessary. Okay, so as we wrap this up, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a fire team leader. Which of these formations would you choose provided the terrain actually supports your selection, and why? Now, for me, I'm kind of a control freak, or at least that's what I've been told. So I prefer a higher level of control, so my automatic instinctive thought would be I'd want a file. Except then I know my fire capabilities suck, my security is not great, and I can't really be as flexible with that formation as I'd like to be, given the enemy situation. So really, the right answer is probably the wedge. Now, I might not have as much control, but my people are going to be safer. We're going to have a better balance of our firepower, and I can expand and contract my personnel as needed, given the terrain and the enemy situation. So for me, the wedge is the right answer. What do you think? So those are our fire team formations. Just 2 that you have to remember, our wedge and our file. But this lesson also goes into our squad formations. So the first one we're going to start with is our squad column. Now before, we were only maneuvering 4 people. Now we're maneuvering 9. But you'll notice that actually the fire team formations build into the squad formations. So with this squad column being our first one, you'll see we've got an alpha team in the front, a bravo team in the rear, with our squad leader right there in the middle. For this particular example, we're going to say that our direction of travel is going north, straight forward. So your alpha team leader is leading their team in the front, and you've got a point man right there. You've got bravo team in the rear, and your squad leader is centered right in between the 2 teams. You'll see that this squad column is really just 2 fire team wedges on top of each other. Now, what do you notice about where the automatic riflemen are in comparison to the rest of the squad? Well, hopefully you see that they're on each side, right? We have one on the right and one on the left. So really, there's 2 wedges on top of each other, but they're mirrored, if that makes any sense. Now, why would we have one automatic rifleman on each side? Well, when we're talking those characteristics, it's for our fire capability. We want to ensure that we have that balance of firepower. So you never want to have both automatic riflemen on one side or the other. Now this is really up to the squad leader to ensure this happens, but the Bravo team leader down here needs to be paying attention up here when Alpha team actually forms up and can decide, oh, if I see an automatic rifleman from Alpha up here, my automatic rifleman needs to be over on this side. And then, just like with the wedge that we already know, the grenadier and the rifleman are going to go on the opposite side. So you can see these two wedges are actually mirrored from each other. Now I also want to bring your attention to two other things about this formation. One, notice that there's still a 10-meter interval between all of our soldiers. So the fire team was spread out, about 30 meters or so from front to rear. Now we're going to add another fire team in there and that squad leader that's going to keep about a 10-meter distance. Now, if you remember from part 1 of this lesson, when we talked about the squad movement techniques, specifically traveling and traveling overwatch, this could be spread out 20 to 50 meters. Now, if we're in traveling, there's going to be about a 20-meter gap between these two fire teams. If we're in traveling overwatch, there should be about a 50-meter gap in between, but that squad leader is going to stay right there. Now, another thing to notice are the additional duties that fall on this first or lead fire team. So in this example, we've got Alpha team, where the Alpha team leader is going to be your point man. That's the person that is the first one to see anything going on in the front. They're leading the entire formation based on what the squad leader is directing them to do. And you see in this example that your grenadier is actually your compass person. That's the one that's got their compass out, making sure that you're going the correct direction that was briefed during the op board before you started this mission. Now, they're just ensuring that you're staying on that track the entire way. So they're consistently checking to make sure you're on the right azimuth. And then you've got your pace man. Now, this is the one that's making sure to keep the distance that you're going. So they know their pace count and they can tell when you've gone 50, 100, 200 meters, and they're letting this squad leader know that this is the distance that we've made it so far. Now, a squad leader or a platoon leader might change up these different additional duties, but it's important to understand that even in this, we have to appoint somebody to be in charge of the compass and pace, and know that the person in the front, that's your point man. Now let's move into a squad line. Now, some people do get confused between the squad line and the squad file, but if you remember, there's no such thing as a fire team line. It's just a fire team file where everybody is in one file formation. So a squad line is actually, rather than having your fire teams in front and behind each other, they're going to be adjacent to each other with that squad leader right directly in the center. Now, in this particular example, we've got our direction of travel again is to the north or forward. So with that, keep in mind on this squad line, everybody is facing forward. They're moving that direction and they're facing forward. Now with that, what do you notice about the location of the automatic riflemen now? Well, they're close to the squad leader. And this time the characteristic that we're focusing on is control. Now the squad leader, being close to the most casualty producing weapon, can actually direct that fire more effectively, assuming that if we've moved into this formation, we are attacking something big in front, because we normally wouldn't move naturally in this formation. So this formation gets moved into when there's something directly in front that we need to be prepared for or engage in, and we as the squad leader want to ensure that we have effective control of our most casualty producing weapon, which is the automatic rifleman right there close to them. Now the final one for our squad formations is going to be that squad file. This is just like that fire team file, but with more people. In this direction, we're moving to the right. That's our direction of travel. So again, for this particular example, our Alpha team leader is going to be the point, squad leader directly in the middle, and then Bravo team following behind the squad leader. Now there are different ways that you could position people between each other and you can move some of your leaders around, but this is kind of the default way to set up a squad file. Now just like with the fire team file and getting adjusted to moving from a wedge to a file, you have to be able to do the same thing with a squad column. That's really just two wedges coming into files again, but it can still get a little confusing, and you want to make sure that your leadership is able to control your casualty producing weapons. So for this one in the squad file, what do you notice about where the automatic riflemen are located now? Well, notice they're right next to a leader. In this example, they're directly behind their own team leaders. just like we showed in the fire team file, right? And what is that for? Again, control. We want to make sure some sort of leadership is directly in control of that automatic rifle. And with that, since you're all moving in one direction, those automatic riflemen should know that they should be facing opposite directions as they're moving. So if I were moving this way in a file and I'm Alpha Team's automatic rifleman, if I'm facing or covering the left with my weapon, the Bravo Team automatic rifleman should already know or be able to be directed easily to be facing and covering the right side. That way our fire capability is still pretty good both ways. But just like with the fire team file, we do not want to stay in this formation for very long. This is again only for that dense, terrible terrain where we can't see each other very easily. And then with this one, if we're in a squad file, we're an even bigger and easier target than the fire team file. So we don't want to be following this formation for very long. All right, so let's compare real quick these three formations. So again, we've got our column, then a squad line, and a squad file. Have to remember the difference between a line and a file. When do we use these? Squad column, that's your default squad formation. That's what we want to be in the majority of the time. We go into a line when we need our maximum firepower to the front because everybody is moving that direction. We go into a file when there's that terrible visibility, dense terrain, dense vegetation, things like that. It's one we don't want to stay in for very long. Now, when we're talking about the column, we've got good control, great flexibility because we can maneuver easily, we have good dispersion, we can move in either traveling or traveling overwatch, and really bounding overwatch. Our fire capabilities, we've got large volumes of fire to the flanks, but not as much to the front or rear because we only have one person in the front and one team in the back. But our security is 360 very easily because everybody has their sector of fire moving around this formation. When we go into that squad line, not as great control because people are spread away from the squad leader and moving in one direction. We don't have very great maneuver capability because moving like this is a lot harder than moving like this or like that. We have maximum and immediate firepower to the front, but nothing really to the rear or to the sides because we're focused on what's in front of us. The security is great to the front because everybody's facing that way, but we have little security to either side where we only have one person, or to the rear where people are going to have to turn and pull security behind us. And with that squad file, just like with the fire team file, great easy control because you're just following the leader. It's hard to maneuver from because spreading out is difficult and you're just following kind of like in a snake formation. Your fire capabilities are great to the sides, but terrible to the front and rear. And your security, this is the least amount. One, because of the way that your weapons are positioned and your soldiers are positioned, but two, because it's too easy to once again track and just follow that line down for an enemy engagement. So quick check, which one's the main squad formation and why? Well, that's your squad column. That's because we've got good control, easy to maneuver. Just like with the wedge, we can expand and contract as needed. We've got great fire capabilities to our flanks, and we've got 360-degree security. Now, which one of those formations is considered the hardest to maneuver from and why? Well, remember, that's that squad file. And that's just because communication can only be passed one soldier at a time because you can only see one soldier at a time. That means that it's tough to be able to pass down head counts, any type of orders from the front all the way back. Our hand and arm signals can only go one at a time. So it just takes a little bit longer to actually maneuver people correctly. Now, with our wedges and our columns, if I'm kind of towards the rear, I can see multiple people in front of me. So if I see a hand and arm signal come back, I know that it's coming. Whereas with the file, one person. So sticking with the squad file, why does it have the least amount of security? Well, because only one soldier can truly cover the front or rear at any given time. And if something comes from the front, maneuvering people out to be able to take it on can be difficult because we can only pass orders back one person at a time. So it can get a little chaotic if you receive any contact from the rear or the front. Our fire capabilities might be great to the side, but that still only accounts for half of our security, which means half of it is vulnerable So in order to react to any kind of contact, it can take a lot of work and communication to get people in the right positions. So if there's anything you take from this, you do not want to stay in a squad file for any longer than you absolutely have to. So how are the characteristics of control, flexibility, fire capability, and security influenced by our formations? Well, one formation might have better control for your team and squad leaders, but might have limited fire capabilities. There's always a time and a place for these formations. And when you take those movement characteristics into account, you can figure out which one of these formations is the most effective or the correct one to use given your situation. All right, now let's just do a quick check on learning to see what all of this lesson you actually caught and what concepts might still be a little confusing. Now, it's easy to just show you some pictures and some diagrams on a slide and in a video, but really the true practice is going to be getting out there into leadership labs and FTX sticks lanes so you can see all this actually come together. Watch what your MS3s do, see how they move their formations, and see if you can pick up on effective decisions and maybe some that didn't quite jive with what I just told you here. So let's start with the fire team. You've just crossed a thickly vegetated area. Now you've come into more open terrain. What should you do as far as your formation goes? Should you move in a file? Should you move into a wedge? Or should you move in a line? Well, you're already hopefully in a file if you're in this thickly vegetated area, and there's no such thing as a fire team line. So you should be moving into a fire team wedge as soon as that terrain permits. Now, where should leaders position themselves in any given formation? Should it be in the front so they can lead? In the rear so they aren't the first to be wounded or killed in combat? Is it where they can best control their formation, or is it really none of those reasons? Well, it's wherever they can best control their formation, whether that be the formation that needs maximum firepower to the front so they're close to their automatic riflemen. Maybe it's positioned so they can maneuver people to the left and right. It all just depends on that formation, but control is going to be key for the leader of that element. Now the last one, when we're talking any kind of file, fire team or squad, when should we not move into a file? Is it when we expect any kind of enemy contact? When we have severely restricted terrain, when our visibility sucks, or when the vegetation is just super dense? Well, we shouldn't move into the file when we're expecting enemy contact because our security sucks and our fire capabilities aren't that great to the front and rear. All right, let's close this whole thing up. I hope that now you feel just a little bit more confident in being able to understand how and when to apply the different team formations and the characteristics. And remember, we have the fire team wedge and the fire team file. That wedge is kind of that triangle, that file is the follow the leader. And to decide between the two, we think of our control, our flexibility, our fire capabilities, and the security that we need. And then I hope you also feel more confident understanding the squad formations. Now remember, there were 3 of those. We had the squad column, which was 2 wedges on top of each other, the squad line, which was 2 wedges next to each other, and the squad file, which, just like the team file, we have them right on top of each other and follow the leader style. Now, if any of these didn't quite make sense or you still have questions, I always recommend you find your own ROTC advisor or instructor, get those questions answered, maybe talk to an MS3 or an MS4, and get those questions answered so that you can be a better part of your fire team and your squad when you move into operational sticks lanes at lab or FTX. Appreciate your time checking out this lesson. Be sure to follow along for more of the MS 102 curriculum. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.